everybody, good morning. Jean here. Thanks everybody for sending your best wishes for me feeling a bit better. I am actually. It was a really nasty bug I had, and I still have a little bit of a cough, but I rested up all weekend. And I'm going to be doing the backing of my quilt. I'm going to try to get right to it because I've been told, I had a few comments that I actually deleted. It said I babble on too much, and I am sorry about that. I was babbling on the last few videos, and you want to just get to it. So I'm going to just get to my backing for my quilt that you've seen me make. This quilt here, and oh, I did forget oh, here we go. When it comes to backing, I was thinking, why in the world do people have such a problem with backing? But then I realized that if you're a beginner, you're making a quilt, and all of a sudden it turns out wider, obviously, than your, however wide fabric is, 44 inches wide. And you're like, my quilt is 65 inches wide. Now, obviously, I have to add on to that, or can we buy some backing, some fabric that's as wide, you know, that's a whole nother animal. You can buy backing fabric, wide backing fabric, it's called. You can go online. I know that Connecting Threads has quite a bit, eQuilter, probably Missouri Star Quilt Company, all of the big companies, Fat Quarter Shop, they have, you know, the fabric companies online do wide, extra wide backing. And it's usually like 108 inches wide, and that's ideal because you don't then have to seam your backing. You don't have to stitch it together to make the size batting you want, the backing you want. I have found that there's a limited selection of extra wide backing fabric, and it is more expensive, but you get what you pay for. So I prefer piecing my backing together. Now, there's many ways that you can do it. Obviously, if you're making a baby quilt that says measures 40 inches by 60 inches, then regular fabric comes usually, what is it? Usually, say I always say 42 inches of usable fabric, minusing your selvages. So if you have a baby quilt that's 39 or 40 inches, then you can just, that's your backing, right? The length of the baby quilt. But then most of us are making throw quilts or twin size quilts. So then you're thinking, well, how do I do it? The way I wanted to show you without cutting up my fabric is there's quite a few ways to go about doing it. The way I piece my backing is I have my one piece of fabric. This is my 42 inch wide fabric by however long it is, okay? But then I need another piece. I actually sew my seam right down the middle of the back. I put 2 of my 42 inch wide fabric and I sew right down the back. Now that's what I will be doing, and I'll be showing you after I've stitched it what I've been doing with this backing fabric, my floral, for this quilt here. Now I'll show you how I measure it, but this is how I do it. I do a seam down the back. Now I will, because this fabric in particular has a floral print, and like wallpaper, some fabrics have a pattern match. So I will actually go and I'll pattern match this. So, and it's not hard to do. It doesn't, you know, it's not hard to do. You just match the pattern up and stitch it down, selvage to selvage, and then I take off the selvages. I go in about 1 inch, however big it is, and then I do remove the selvages. Now, a lot of people who send their quilters apparently out to like a long arm quilter, if you're going to piece your backing and you send your quilt top and your backing to a long arm quilter to be quilted by someone else, they like to have your backing this way, apparently, with your seam going across, because when they go to pull the backing onto their machine, they like to have it that way, which makes a lot more sense than the stress going on that seam. So people can piece their batting this way. Now, another way to do it, which I think probably is the best way, but it takes a little bit more time, and it'll probably end up, I don't think it ends up better because my batting has always looked fabulous. And but the way they do it is, here's your 42 inch wide fabric. They take your other bit of fabric and they have one seam. They cut the fabric in half, one seam and two seams. So they do it that way. So you have down the middle of your quilt, from like say here to here, a piece, and then your seams are on this side of your quilt top. I'm not bothered. I will measure my quilt across. I'll measure my quilt. Now this quilt here is this 62 inches. So let me see, this quilt is 62 inches wide by 80 inches long. It's a nice throw size quilt, small twin. So it's 62 by 80. Now automatically I realize if I take my 42 inch wide fabric here and 42 inch wide fabric here, I'm going to end up with 84 inches, 85 inches or whatever of fabric going across, okay? So here's my seam down the middle, which I do. So I'll have my fabric going across. So I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about, it's going to be plenty wide because this is only 62 inches wide. So I will then cut my fabric. I will need two lengths of my fabric, 80 inches long, but I always add, you always want to add, this is the important thing, to your backing, you always want to add 5 or 6 inches. And you're thinking, well, why is that? Quilting takes up a little bit, and also it just makes it a lot easier when you're laying your quilt out basting, that you're not right to the edge of your backing and you're messing about. So you always cut your backing and your batting bigger, and I always use about 5 or 6 inches. I do. Literally maybe 3 or 4 inches on the top and 3 or 4 inches on the bottom. And then of course I have the extra around the side. So I will cut this, I will cut 2 pieces of this backing fabric for this quilt, 80, say 85, 86 inches, which I've allowed for. And then, I think I have. Oh, I think I have. Well, maybe I haven't. Oh dear, maybe this quilt's a bit longer. Anyway, I'll have to figure it out. If I didn't get enough fabric, I didn't get enough fabric. Then I would allow for the pattern match, which might only be a few inches, but I think I have enough fabric here. So I will piece my batting. This is how I do it. I will piece my batting in the middle with a seam down the middle, or you could do it this way with a seam going sideways, or you could do it this way, having cut your fabric probably just along the fold line, and you still get, do you understand that? If you cut it this way to have your one piece here, this width, and then your big piece going this way in the middle, you still get your width out of your 2 bits of fabric, of your 2 lengths of fabric. So I hope that makes a lot of sense. If you're going to be sending your quilts out, you want to stitch your batting that way across. I had enough fabric. And I think why I had enough fabric is, I think on another video, I was saying that usually you end up making the same sort of size if you're making throw quilts. They're usually like 60 by 70 or something like that. This happened to be a little bit longer. But what I usually do, I said on another thing, I just take a yardstick and it's like 36 inches, 72 inches, and then I add a bit. And actually that's what I did. This quilt was 80 inches long that I made. And so I think if you actually do it properly and by like how other people do it, it's it would be like 4.5 yards or something. I always buy more. I always buy more. And in this case, I buy more because of my pattern match. Remember I was telling you, probably as a beginner you don't want to get a pattern match. And even if you don't pattern match it, who cares? It'll take a blind man to see it. That the pattern doesn't match. But if you want to do it nicely, which I've pretty much done here, pretty nicely, it takes up a little bit more. Now, as I was telling you, this is my seam. I haven't ironed anything. I haven't pressed anything. So when I do press it, this seam here, there's my seam down the middle of my quilt, which I just sewed. It will be, you won't even probably be able to tell that seam. Up close, you can see maybe the pattern match is a little bit off. But what I look for is this here. You see these roses? They're going down. I matched it. I didn't match the leaves properly. I didn't even pin it. But just like a general pattern match. Now, when you do the pattern match, I don't know if you can see it, on the top and the bottom, I bought 5 yards of backing. Now, that would usually be plenty enough. But on the top and the bottom, I took 2.5 yards and I just cut my 5-yard length right in half. Okay, so this piece is 2.5 yards, this piece is 2.5 yards. But because of my pattern match, which you probably won't be doing, I actually lost. I lost about 3 inches on the bottom here, and I lost about 4 inches on the top up there. So there's 7 inches to pattern match. And then I want to show you, I usually do selvage to selvage, and if you're doing an all-over fabric for your backing, you don't have to worry about pattern matching. I go at not the 1/4 inch. I go in a good 1.5 inches off of my selvage edges, okay? If I'm just back, and it's just a plain old backing pattern. Again, I always would recommend that beginners get a small pattern or a larger pattern to disguise your quilting. I'm a good quilter, and my backing stitches are good, but if they're not, because you're learning and there might be a skipped stitch or a little loopy of a stitch or a stitch that goes a bit further because you're just learning, your backing, it'll disguise it. So you want to just get, I don't think I've ever done a solid backing because your backing has to look as good as your front, and I think my last quilt that I did, this was more of a tone on a tone, the blue quilt that I made. But even then, even though it sort of reads blue, it has a pattern. And you can't really see the quilting stitches, although you can see the quilting. But you want to be careful when you're buying the batting as a beginner, that you buy a busier fabric, unless you're really brave and you're perfect. I'm not. So anyway, what I did do is when I matched my pattern here, again, this might be a little bit more advanced, you'll want to, as a beginner, sew, here's my selvage edge, right, with all the writing on it. You put your selvage edges together, and I would sew in maybe 1.5 inches, even 1.5 inches away from that selvage. And then selvages are woven, you can feel them, they're woven with those little dots, they're woven tighter than your weave of your fabric. So when you go to wash this, your selvage will shrink up tighter. So you have to get rid of your selvage if you're stitching your backing fabric together. You have to cut that, and so you have to allow yourself enough to cut that selvage away, and then you have a nice seam there. I press my seams. Some people open them up. I just press them to one side. I sort of roll it over on my ironing board, as you know, and I'll just press them to one side. But a lot of people press their backing seam open. It's whosever preference. But I wanted to show you here, to pattern match this, I actually had to go in on each piece. Again, I have the width, so I'm not bothered about that. I'm not frightened that I'm going to, it's messing my width up. I have plenty of width here, but I had to go in actually about 4 inches to get this pattern match here. So that's 4 inches on that side. Here's my seam, and 4 inches on this side to find the pattern match. Again, that's pattern matching. You'll probably be able to see this seam, but when it's really ironed well, I'll cut my selvage off, I'll trim it off, I'll press it to one side, I'll press it to one side, and then I completely lose that pattern match. And there's my backing. Look how much backing I have. So my quilt is only 62 inches wide, as we've seen, but I'll have this backing. So then I will center it. Maybe I won't. Actually, sometimes I don't even center it, because if I lose the seam can be over here. So then when I have the extra, I can cut off maybe a nice big piece of fabric for my stash over here. Yeah, I probably won't center it. So maybe this seam will end up over here. Again, I'm not bothered. But if people, like if you can see your seam, then you would want it centered. Or if you want to do it really well, you want one seam there and one seam here. But you're going to end up trimming it anyway. You have excess of fabric here that's, you know, for this size of a quilt. So yeah, I bought 5 yards just to make it simpler. This is a quilt that's 62 inches wide by 80 inches long. I bought about 5 yards of fabric. I will have fabric left over from my side, which I can then put in my stash. I won't have an awfully lot of fabric left over on the top or the bottom. I was lucky because this quilt is bigger, and I did have to allow for this pattern match, but you probably won't be doing that, the pattern matches on fabrics. So yeah, so that's how I do my backing. I don't know if that helped or not. You can, like I said, you can go buy your extra wide backing. You don't have to do this. You just lay it out and you lay your quilt, you sandwich it together. But I like the benefit of having a pretty backing from either your stash or some other fabric you got. Like I said, this backing is for this quilt. I will be quilting this, and I'll be showing you the finished quilt. I don't know how I'm gonna actually quilt this. Again, that's always, people say, well, how do you decide how to quilt it? It's when I put it on my machine. After I sandwich it together, I'm like, how am I going to quilt this? And again, a lot of it I do free motion because this is curved. So I probably will do a little bit of free motion, curving my seams, curving my quilting stitches in these curves. But I could just do it straight. You know. And actually on this quilt, this, interesting, this 10-minute quilt block, which we've done to death, you can, on your home sewing machine, with just a straight stitch, you can curve it. You can just curve that gently around there, curve that gently around there. It doesn't really, you don't have to sort of, you know, mess with it under your press-a-foot, but you could do that to create that curve. Free motion quilting is easier because I don't have to move my fabric. I can just let the needle do it. So anyway, that's my backing for this quilt. I'll be showing you the finished thing when I get it around to quilting it. But there's how I do my seam. I've never had trouble with my backing pulling out or anything like that. So that's how I do it. But there's plenty of other tutorials that tell you how other people do it. So, but this is how I do it. And it's always been good. So, thank you again for tuning in. And everybody have a lovely day. Bye.